There are moments in life when God does not speak loudly. He doesn't thunder from the sky. He doesn't stop the storm. Instead, he waits to see who will listen. On a frozen winter night, a mother dog stood trembling in the snow, shielding her child with what little strength she had left. People nearby heard the sounds. They felt something wasn't right. But fear kept most doors closed. Still, God did not turn away. Because sometimes faith doesn't look like prayer. It looks like someone choosing to stop, to notice, to act. If you believe God still works through ordinary people, through quiet courage, through compassion that refuses to look away, type Amen in the comments. And stay with this story. Snow fell steadily over the small Midwestern town, softening the streets, dulling sound, and sealing everything under a cold white silence that felt heavier than it looked. Jack Miller's house stood at the far end of Maple Street, a sagging two-story structure with peeling paint and windows that rarely showed light. It had once been pale blue. Now it was the color of neglect. The front yard was uneven, the fence half collapsed, and the mailbox leaned like it had given up resisting gravity. In winter, no footprints lingered near the house for long. People crossed the street before reaching it. Jack Miller was 46, though he looked older. His face was sharply angled, cheekbones pronounced, skin weathered and dry, with a permanent redness around his nose and eyes. His beard grew in uneven patches, dark with streaks of gray, often untrimmed. When sober, which was rare, his eyes were a washed-out blue, restless and guarded. When drunk, they went flat and unfocused, like glass left out in the cold. He had not always been like this. Years ago, Jack had worked construction, strong-backed and reliable. A fall from scaffolding shattered his ankle and ended his job. The painkillers turned into bottles, and the bottles turned into habit. The town remembered the man he used to be, but only distantly, the way one remembers an old photograph found in a drawer. Inside the house, the air was thick with the sour smell of alcohol and damp wood. Empty bottles lined the kitchen counter and rolled across the floor when kicked. The heating worked only when Jack remembered to turn it on. Most nights, he didn't. In the corner of the living room lay Daisy, a golden retriever, nearly 6 years old. Her coat, once thick and shining, was now dull and tangled, clotted with dirt and old stains. She was thin, her ribs faintly visible beneath her fur. One ear bent slightly forward, the other permanently tilted back, a result of an old injury no one had treated. Her brown eyes, large and expressive, followed Jack constantly, measuring his movements, anticipating danger. Curled against her chest was her puppy, barely 3 months old. The pup was small even for its age, its golden fur matted and patchy, paws oversized for its fragile body. It trembled often, not always from the cold. Daisy kept her body curved tightly around the puppy, her head always angled outward, a quiet barrier between the world and her child. Jack did not like the dogs when he drank. Their presence irritated him, their movement too loud, their need too constant. When his temper flared, he shouted first. Then came the bottle against the wall, sometimes worse. Daisy had learned not to growl. She had learned that silence was safer. The neighbors heard everything. They heard the shouting, the crashes, the sharp yelp that cut through the walls too thin to protect anyone inside. Curtains were drawn tighter. Televisions were turned up. People told themselves it wasn't their business. Jack Miller was unpredictable, and unpredictability scared people more than cruelty. Across the street lived Sarah Whitman, a woman in her early 30s. She was tall and slender, with pale skin that never seemed to tan, even in summer. Her hair was light brown, usually pulled into a low ponytail, practical and unremarkable. Sarah worked at the local pharmacy, polite but reserved, the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her. She had seen Daisy once, briefly, when Jack left the door open while yelling into the phone. Sarah remembered the dog's eyes more than anything else. She thought about them often, especially at night, when sound carried easily through the cold air. Twice, she had picked up her phone, fingers hovering over the screen. Twice, she put it down again. Fear was easier than action. Winter deepened. Snowbanks grew higher along the streets. The town moved more slowly, wrapped in coats and routine. Daisy's world shrank to the dim rooms of the house and the small patch of frozen ground outside. She no longer barked at passing cars. She saved her energy for standing. One night, Jack came home later than usual. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. His steps were uneven, heavy. Daisy rose immediately, positioning herself between him and the puppy. Her legs shook, but she did not move away. Jack noticed. He always did. "Move," he slurred, voice thick with anger and alcohol. Daisy did not growl. She simply stood there, head low, body rigid, eyes locked on him. The puppy pressed closer to her belly, making a small sound, more breath than noise. Something shattered against the wall. Daisy flinched but did not retreat. Jack cursed, loud and sharp, his voice cutting through the house like broken glass. Outside, snow continued to fall, indifferent. Sarah lay awake in her bed across the street, staring at the ceiling. She heard the crash. She heard the yelling. Her chest tightened, breath shallow. She told herself she would check in the morning. She told herself someone else would step in. No one did. Later that night, the storm worsened. Wind howled down Maple Street, erasing tracks as quickly as they formed. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Daisy lay curled around her puppy near the door, muscles aching, eyes refusing to close. Then, through the swirling snow, light appeared. Headlights swept briefly across the front of the house, illuminating the peeling paint, the crooked mailbox, the frozen yard. The light slowed, lingered for a moment, then shifted. Inside, Daisy lifted her head. The puppy stirred. Outside, the engine noise softened, almost stopped. Then the light was gone, swallowed by snow and darkness, leaving the house exactly as it had been. Quiet, cold, and waiting. Morning arrived without warmth. The snow that had fallen through the night lay smooth and untouched, reflecting a pale gray sky. Maple Street looked peaceful, almost innocent, as if nothing cruel could exist beneath such quiet. Sarah Whitman stood at her kitchen window, holding a mug of coffee she had forgotten to drink. The steam rose, then vanished, just like the resolve she had tried to build all night. She was tall and narrow-shouldered, with soft features that rarely showed anger. Her light brown hair was loosely braided over one shoulder, strands already slipping free. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, proof that sleep had not come easily. She looked across the street at Jack Miller's house. The yard looked wrong. The snow near the back fence was disturbed, pressed down unevenly, as if something had been dragged or had struggled there. A faint discoloration marked the white surface, too light to be obvious, too dark to be ignored. Sarah's stomach tightened. She told herself it could be rust, dirt, anything but what her mind insisted it was. She had grown up believing that good people did not interfere unless they were certain. That certainty, however, never seemed to arrive. Further down the street, Mr. Harold Finch shoveled his driveway in stiff, mechanical motions. He was in his late 60s, broad through the shoulders despite his age, with thick gray eyebrows that gave him a perpetually stern look. A retired postal worker, Harold had lived on Maple Street longer than anyone else. He paused, leaned on his shovel, and glanced toward Jack's house. His jaw tightened. He had heard the dog last night. At the corner, a young couple hurried their children toward a parked SUV, keeping their eyes forward. No one waved. No one lingered. Yet more people were looking than before, their glances sharper, heavier with unspoken thoughts. Inside Jack's house, the air was colder than usual. Daisy lay on her side near the back door, her breathing shallow but steady. Her body ached in places she could not name. One of her hind legs trembled uncontrollably when she tried to shift her weight. Still, when the puppy whimpered, she lifted her head and nudged it closer with her nose. The puppy had not cried much since the night before. Its eyes were duller now, movements slower. Its small body fit entirely beneath Daisy's chest, as if trying to disappear into her warmth. Daisy licked the top of its head again and again, a repetitive motion driven by instinct more than thought. Jack had not woken yet. He lay sprawled on the couch, boots still on, an empty bottle tipped over near his hand. His face was slack, beard matted, mouth slightly open. In sleep, he looked less dangerous, almost fragile. Daisy knew better than to believe it meant anything. Around noon, a car slowed near the house. Sarah noticed first. She stepped back from the window, heart pounding, then returned cautiously. A dark sedan idled at the curb for a few seconds. She recognized neither the car nor the driver. The engine hummed, hesitated, then continued down the street. It was the second time someone had slowed since dawn. At the local grocery store, whispers traveled faster than the automatic doors. A woman mentioned seeing a dog outside in the snow. Someone else said they heard yelling again. No names were spoken, but everyone knew which house they meant. The discomfort was no longer contained to private kitchens and closed bedrooms. That afternoon, a call was made. The caller did not give a name. The voice shook, low and hurried, explaining there were dogs, maybe hurt, maybe freezing. The caller hung up before answering questions, leaving the operator with fragments and a location narrowed only to a street. It was enough to log a note, not enough to send help. Sarah sat on her couch that evening, phone in hand. Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. She pictured Jack's face, red and twisted with rage. She pictured Daisy's eyes. The conflict pressed against her chest until breathing felt difficult. She placed the phone down, then, moments later, picked it up again. Outside, dusk settled in. Snow began to fall once more, soft but relentless. Daisy struggled to her feet when she heard movement beyond the yard. Her legs nearly gave out, but she forced herself upright, body swaying. The puppy whimpered softly. Footsteps crunched on snow. Daisy's ears pricked forward. She stood, bracing herself between the sound and her child. The steps stopped. A shadow moved along the fence line, paused, then retreated. The scent was unfamiliar. Not Jack, not threatening. Still, Daisy did not relax. Across the street, Sarah watched from behind her curtain, her hand pressed to her mouth. She had stepped outside, just for a moment, curiosity and guilt pushing her farther than she meant to go. When she heard the sound from the yard, she froze. She went back inside, heart racing, knowing with sick certainty that whatever was happening across the street was getting worse. Silence returned to Maple Street, but it no longer felt peaceful. It felt fragile, as though one wrong sound could shatter it completely. And this time, more than one person knew it. Megan Cole first noticed the house on Maple Street because of how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that felt guarded, like something inside was holding its breath. She slowed her patrol car every time she passed it, almost without realizing she was doing so. The windows were always dark, even in early evening. No holiday lights, no movement, just a sagging house at the edge of town, wrapped in snow and avoidance. Megan was 34, average height, with an athletic build shaped by years of routine training rather than vanity. Her dark blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun beneath her patrol cap, practical and severe. She had a narrow face with sharp cheekbones and steady gray-green eyes that missed very little. A faint scar cut through her left eyebrow, the result of a domestic disturbance call early in her career, an incident that had taught her how quickly situations could turn and how long consequences could last. She had grown up in a working-class family, the daughter of a mechanic and a school secretary. Order and responsibility were things she believed in deeply. Rules mattered, not because they were perfect, but because they were the only barrier between chaos and harm. That belief had carried her through the academy and into night patrol, where instincts mattered as much as procedure. On Maple Street, her instincts kept stirring. She smelled the alcohol before she saw anything else. Even through the cold air and closed windows, the sour scent lingered when she slowed near the house. She noticed the backyard next to the snow. There was never smooth. It was always pressed down in odd places, as if something moved there when no one was supposed to be watching. One night, near the end of her shift, Megan pulled over 2 houses down and shut off her engine. Snow drifted lazily under the streetlight, thick enough to muffle sound. She sat there, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. That was when she heard it. Not a bark, not a cry. A sound so faint it could have been mistaken for wind slipping through a crack. A low, strained whimper that rose just enough to be noticed, then stopped. Megan's spine straightened. She listened harder, heart pounding, but the sound did not come again. Silence settled back over the street, heavy and complete. She glanced at the house, then at her watch. Without probable cause, without a call logged, she could do nothing. She restarted the engine and drove on, frustration tightening her jaw. The sound stayed with her. The next evening, Megan spoke briefly with her supervisor, Officer Daniel Ruiz, a man in his early 40s with a solid build and a calm, deliberate manner. His dark hair was cropped short, his beard neatly trimmed, and his expression permanently thoughtful. Ruiz had spent years working high-volume precincts before transferring to this quieter town. He listened more than he spoke. "Maple Street," Megan said carefully. "House at the end. Something's off." Ruiz nodded. "We've had vague calls before. Noise complaints. Nothing solid." "I know," she replied, "but I'm watching it." "Document everything," he said. "If it crosses a line, we act." Back on Maple Street, Sarah Whitman noticed the patrol car for the first time. She was standing by her living room window, arms wrapped around herself, when the headlights swept across the snow. Her heart jumped, then sank when the car continued past without stopping. Sarah was still tall and slender, still pale, but something in her posture had changed. Her shoulders were more tense now, her movements quicker, more uncertain. Guilt had a way of reshaping a person from the inside out. Inside Jack Miller's house, Daisy struggled to stand again. Her hind leg buckled, pain flaring sharply, but she forced herself upright. The puppy nudged her weakly, its nose cold against her fur. Daisy licked its face, slow and deliberate, then positioned herself between the puppy and the door. Her body trembled, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion that sank into her bones. Jack woke briefly, groaning, then rolled over and went still again. The bottle on the floor remained untouched. Daisy did not trust the quiet. Outside, Megan returned once more that week, parking farther away and approaching on foot. She did not enter the property. She did not knock. She simply observed. She noted the smell, the lack of heat, the condition of the yard. She recorded dates, times, impressions, small pieces of a picture that was slowly taking shape. When she left, she did not feel relief. She felt the weight of waiting. On the fourth night, snow began falling harder. Megan drove down Maple Street again, slower than before. She did not hear the sound this time. What she saw was worse. A small shape moved briefly in the yard, then disappeared. Too low to be a person, too unsteady to be a healthy animal. Megan stopped the car, heart racing, and watched. Nothing else moved. Across the street, Sarah's porch light flicked on, then off again. She stood frozen behind her door, hand on the lock, knowing she was standing at the edge of a decision she had been avoiding for days. Megan remained in her car for several minutes after that, eyes fixed on the house. She knew the limits of her authority. She knew the rules she had sworn to follow. She also knew this was no longer something she could unsee. As she drove away, she logged another note, another observation, another night. The pattern was forming, and once a pattern existed, it could no longer be ignored. The cold sharpened everything. It sharpened the air, turning each breath into a thin blade in the lungs. It sharpened tempers, patience, and fear. And in Jack Miller, it sharpened something already broken. Jack's decline was no longer subtle. The bottles emptied faster now. His movements were rougher, less controlled. His face carried a constant flush, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, as if he were always bracing for a blow the world owed him. The injury that had once taken his job still ached in winter, and he treated the pain the only way he knew how, by drinking until anger replaced sensation. Inside the house, Daisy felt the shift before anything happened. Animals learned patterns faster than people did. She recognized the sound of Jack's steps when he was only drunk, and the heavier, erratic thud when something worse followed. That night, she moved her body without thinking, placing herself between him and the puppy as he stumbled into the room. The puppy whimpered, weak and hoarse. Its fur was thin now, patches clumped together by dirt and melted snow. Its eyes, once curious, had grown cautious. Daisy's muscles trembled as she stood, her injured leg barely holding her weight. Jack saw the movement. "What are you looking at?" he snapped, voice sharp, slurred, unpredictable. The kick came fast. Daisy collapsed sideways, breath knocked from her chest. Pain flared white-hot through her ribs and down her leg. She tried to rise and failed. The puppy crawled toward her, pressing its small body against her neck, making a sound that barely reached the air. Jack swore, pacing, knocking a chair over. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rage burned itself out. He staggered away, leaving the room colder than before. Outside, the snow absorbed the noise. Across the street, Sarah Whitman heard enough. She was standing in her hallway, still dressed for bed, hair loose around her shoulders. The pale skin of her face looked almost translucent under the dim light. Her hands were clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. When the sharp sound cut through the night, something between a thud and a cry, she flinched hard enough to hit the wall. She did not scream. She did not move. Her phone lay on the small table beside her. This time, she picked it up. She didn't dial. She opened the camera instead, pointing it shakily toward the window, recording nothing but darkness and falling snow. Her breath came too fast. Tears burned behind her eyes, frustration mixing with fear. She stopped recording after a few seconds, ashamed of how little she had done. Down the street, Megan Cole sat in her patrol car. She had been circling the area more frequently now, building a timeline, a record. The heater hummed quietly as she parked at the far end of Maple Street, lights off, engine running low. Her posture was rigid, hands folded tightly in her lap. Then she heard it. This time, it was clearer. A sharp impact. Then a low, broken sound that tightened something deep in her chest. Megan leaned forward instinctively, eyes locked on the dark outline of Jack's house. Her pulse spiked. She reached for the door handle, then stopped herself. Procedure. She forced her hand back, forced her breathing to slow. She turned on her body camera. She documented the time, the sound, the distance. She spoke quietly into the recorder, voice steady even as her jaw trembled. She did not cross the property line. She did not knock. From the car, she could see the yard. The snow near the back door was disturbed again. A shape lay unmoving near the threshold. Megan stayed until the house went still. When she finally drove away, her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She hated the rules in moments like this, not because they were wrong, but because they were slow, because they demanded patience when instinct demanded action. The next morning, Megan filed her notes. She requested guidance from animal control, attaching her observations. The response was cautious. Without direct evidence or an active complaint, options were limited. Limited did not mean non-existent, but it meant waiting. At the grocery store, Sarah watched Megan's patrol car pass by and felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, so was the guilt, but beneath them now was something harder to ignore. Resolve. Back at the house, Daisy lay breathing shallowly. Every movement sent pain through her body, but she stayed conscious, eyes open, alert. The puppy pressed against her, tiny chest fluttering rapidly. She licked its face slowly, deliberately, telling it in the only language she had that she was still there. That night, Megan returned again. She parked farther away this time and approached on foot, stopping well short of the fence. She listened. She watched. She smelled the alcohol in the air and the metallic hint of something else she did not want to name. She knew she was standing on a line. On one side was her badge, her oath, the structure that kept her from becoming reckless. On the other was the knowledge that waiting too long carried its own consequences. As she turned back toward her car, Megan made a decision not to act yet, but to stop pretending neutrality was an option. From that night on, she would no longer simply observe. She would prepare. The storm arrived faster than predicted. Snow fell sideways, driven by wind strong enough to rattle windows and bury sound beneath a constant roar. Streetlights faded into pale halos, their reach shortened by the thickening white curtain. Maple Street disappeared, one house at a time, until the world felt reduced to what could be seen from a single window. Inside Jack Miller's house, the power flickered twice and held. Jack laughed at it, a short, bitter sound, and took another swallow from the bottle in his hand. His movements were sloppy now, balance unreliable, anger simmering beneath the alcohol. His beard was darker with spilled liquor, his eyes unfocused, jaw tight with pain and resentment he refused to name. The dogs were already in his way. Daisy lay near the back door, breathing shallowly, body rigid with effort. Her leg throbbed with every shift of weight. The puppy pressed against her, too tired to whimper now, tiny chest fluttering rapidly. Daisy lifted her head when Jack approached, a warning without sound. "Out," Jack muttered. He grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. Cold exploded into the room. Snow rushed in, wind cutting through the house like a blade. Jack dragged Daisy by the collar, her paws scrambling uselessly on the floor. Pain flared, sharp and blinding, but she did not cry out. The puppy slid after her, claws scraping, until both were shoved outside. The door slammed shut. The yard was chaos snow, piling unevenly, wind tearing at fur and skin. Daisy staggered, then collapsed onto her side, curling instinctively around the puppy. She shifted her body, blocking the wind as best she could, pressing her warmth against the small, trembling form beneath her chest. Minutes passed, then more. The cold crept in steadily, a numbness that dulled pain and slowed thought. Daisy's eyes fluttered, then forced themselves open again. She licked the puppy's face, slow, deliberate, counting the movement as proof she was still awake. Across the street, Sarah Whitman stood frozen in her living room. She had changed out of her work clothes hours earlier, but hadn't moved since. Her hair hung loose, light brown strands brushing her shoulders, her pale skin drained of color. She watched the yard through a narrow gap in the curtain, breath fogging the glass. When the door opened and the dogs were forced outside, Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. A sound escaped her before she could stop it, a small broken noise swallowed by the storm. She stepped toward the door, then stopped, fear slamming into her chest, hard enough to make her dizzy. She knew Jack's temper. She knew what he was capable of. Her phone was already in her hand. This time, she dialed. The line connected, her voice shaking as she gave the address, the conditions, the storm. She did not hang up early. She stayed on until the operator told her help would be sent when conditions allowed. When the call ended, Sarah slid down against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, guilt and relief colliding painfully. Down the street, Megan Cole felt the storm before she saw it. Her patrol car rocked slightly in the wind as she turned onto Maple Street, visibility reduced to a few yards at best. Snow struck the windshield in thick bursts, the wipers struggling to keep up. She drove slowly, deliberately, eyes scanning for movement. Her radio crackled with weather updates and cautionary advisories. Then a partial call came through. Animal distress, Maple Street, storm conditions ongoing. Megan's grip tightened on the wheel. She knew the house before she reached it. She parked at the edge of the block, engine running, lights off. Wind howled around the car, rocking it again. Megan stepped out anyway, pulling her coat tighter, boots sinking into snow with every step. She stopped short of the fence. The yard was barely visible, but she saw the shape near the back door. Too still, too low. Megan raised her flashlight, beam cutting through the storm. The light caught golden fur, dulled and stiff with snow. Then smaller movement beneath it. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. She did not cross the line. Not yet. She radioed in conditions, her voice clipped, controlled. She documented what she could see, what she could hear, the wind, the faintest sound beneath it that might have been breathing. She requested animal control backup, knowing response would be slow if it came at all in weather like this. Time stretched. Inside the house, Jack collapsed onto the couch, bottle slipping from his fingers. Sleep took him quickly, heavy and untroubled. Outside, Daisy shifted again, barely conscious. Her body trembled uncontrollably now, the cold seeping deeper. She pressed her muzzle against the puppy's neck, breathing warmth into it, refusing to let go. Megan stood at the fence, snow collecting on her shoulders, her eyelashes rimed with ice. She had never felt the weight of the law so sharply, not as protection, but as restraint. She knew what would happen if she crossed that fence without authority. She also knew what waiting could cost. Her radio crackled again. Delays, unsafe conditions, document and hold. Megan lowered the flashlight and looked up at the darkened house. Across the street, she noticed a porch light flicker on, then off again. A silhouette moved behind a window. People were awake now, watching, waiting. The storm showed no sign of easing. Megan remained where she was, eyes locked on the shape in the yard, counting breaths she could barely see, telling herself that help was coming, even as doubt pressed harder with every passing minute. This was the night everything balanced on the edge. The storm broke just before dawn. The wind softened first, then the snow eased into a steady fall, lighter and quieter. Maple Street emerged slowly from the night, buried but intact. The silence that followed was not peaceful, it was expectant, as if the town itself were waiting to see what would happen next. Megan Cole was still there. Snow crusted her coat and clung to her hair, which had come loose from its tight bun, dark blonde strands frozen against her cheek. Her face was pale from the cold, lips pressed into a hard line. She had not slept. She had not left. Every few minutes, she checked the yard again, counting the rise and fall of Daisy's chest with the beam of her flashlight. It was faint, but it was there. Her radio crackled, sharper this time. Confirmation. Animal control was en route, escorted. The storm had delayed them, not canceled them. Megan closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding all night. When the vehicles arrived, the quiet shattered. Red and blue lights cut through the gray morning, reflecting off snowbanks and windows. Doors opened, boots hit the ground. The presence of authority changed the air instantly. Jack Miller woke to the sound of pounding. He stumbled to the door, confusion turning quickly into rage. His face was unshaven, eyes bloodshot, movements sluggish. He shouted through the door, slurred threats tumbling over one another. When he opened it, Megan stood there, posture straight, voice calm, flanked by 2 officers and an animal control officer. The warrant was brief, clear. Jack argued, then he laughed. Then his voice rose again, sharp and defensive. When the officers stepped forward, he resisted just long enough to make the cuffs necessary. The fight drained out of him quickly, leaving only bitterness and disbelief as he was led away. Across the street, Sarah Whitman watched from her doorway. She had not slept either. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, dark circles beneath her eyes, her slender frame wrapped in a thick sweater she clutched around herself. When she saw the dogs being carried out, she pressed her hand to her chest and began to cry, quietly, uncontrollably. In the yard, Daisy barely lifted her head. Her fur was stiff with ice, her breathing shallow and uneven. Her eyes fluttered as gloved hands gently slid beneath her body. She tensed weakly, instinct urging her to protect the puppy even now. The animal control officer moved slowly, speaking softly, careful not to separate them until warmth and safety were assured. The puppy was alive, cold, exhausted, but alive. They were wrapped together in blankets and rushed into a waiting vehicle. Megan watched until the doors closed, until the sound of the engine faded. Only then did the tightness in her chest begin to ease. The reports took hours. Statements, documentation, evidence compiled from weeks of notes, recordings, observations. Sarah gave her statement last, voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. For the first time, she did not look away. Jack was charged before nightfall. The days that followed were quieter. Maple Street felt different, lighter, though the snow remained. People spoke to one another again. Doors opened. Eyes met. Daisy survived. The veterinarian said it was close. Hypothermia, untreated injuries, severe exhaustion. But she was strong, stronger than anyone had expected. The puppy recovered faster, small body resilient despite everything it had endured. It slept pressed against Daisy's side, rising and falling with her breath as if afraid to let go. Megan visited once, standing quietly near the kennel, hands resting in her coat pockets. Daisy watched her with tired but clear eyes. The puppy slept on. Megan did not touch them. She did not need to. Spring came slowly. Snow melted into muddy patches. Grass returned, tentative and green. The town shifted with the season, as it always did. Months later, Megan drove out to a small farm just beyond the city limits. The property was modest open fields, a white fence, a weathered barn. She parked and stepped out, the air warm for the first time in what felt like forever. Daisy ran. Her coat had filled out, golden and clean, catching the sunlight. She moved with a slight limp, permanent but manageable. The puppy, no longer so small, bounded beside her, clumsy and joyful, ears flopping wildly. They ran without fear. Megan stood at the fence, hands resting on the wood, watching them disappear into the tall grass and return again. She felt no triumph, no sense of victory, only quiet certainty. The law had been followed, responsibility had been taken, courage had come, not all at once, but in pieces, observation, patience, and finally, action. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly through one person who chooses not to look away. God does not always change the storm. Sometimes He sends someone into it. In our everyday lives, we pass moments like this more often than we realize. A sound we ignore, a situation we assume is not our responsibility, a chance to act that feels too small to matter. But love, compassion, and courage are never small in God's eyes. If this story moved you, please share it, because someone else may need this reminder today. Leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story. And if you believe that kindness still matters in this world, subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can be told. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you, especially on the days when doing the right thing feels difficult. And may you always recognize the moment when you are the miracle someone else is praying for.